The stars above the Valari capital burned like cold silver fires, their light falling upon a palace built of crystal and sorrow. Inside those shining walls, Princess Sereth of Velar sat alone, her heart heavy with anger and disbelief. The war between her people and the humans had finally ended, but the price of peace was her. A royal marriage, a political bond between enemies. She was to marry a human. Her claws tapped restlessly against the glass floor as she stared out the window. The gardens below were calm, filled with blue leaves and whispering light, but inside her chest was only storm. A human husband, she muttered bitterly. Is this what peace means now? Surrendering dignity for politics? Sereth was not afraid of war, but she was terrified of this, of the unknown nature of humankind. The Valari had always considered humans unpredictable, violent, and too emotional. They were known for fighting like wild creatures, unrefined, reckless, but impossible to defeat. Even the great generals of Velar had admitted in secret that the humans were not just strong in body, they were strong in spirit. And that was something the Valari never understood. As she prepared for the ceremony, servants moved quietly, afraid to speak. The princess's silver armor gleamed in the candlelight, a last reminder of the warrior she had been before becoming a symbol of peace. She looked at herself in the mirror. Her golden eyes, sharp and proud, reflected no joy. I will not bow to him, she whispered. No matter what. When the time came, she entered the grand hall. The room was filled with both species, Valari nobles with their jeweled skin and human officers in dark blue uniforms. The air was thick with tension, two civilizations trying to pretend they could forgive centuries of bloodshed. Then he walked in. Captain Elias Ward. He was taller than most humans she had seen in battle footage. His shoulders were broad, his posture straight, but there was no arrogance in his step. His brown eyes carried a calm warmth that startled her more than any weapon could. He bowed slightly when he approached her, not the deep, formal bow of Valari custom, but a humble human one. When their eyes met, she felt an odd stillness. There was no fear, no challenge, only respect. I know you didn't choose this, he said quietly, his voice steady but soft. But I promise I will do everything I can to make this life not unbearable. Sereth blinked. His accent was strange, his tone too gentle. She had expected a proud soldier, a conqueror perhaps, someone who would look at her with victory in his gaze. But this man, he looked at her as if he already understood her pain. I do not need your pity, human, she replied coldly. He nodded once, unoffended. Then I will give you my respect instead. The ceremony began. Words of peace were spoken, vows exchanged. The humans clapped politely. The Valari watched in silence. When it ended, and the treaty was sealed with their union, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. That night, Sereth sat on her balcony, the two moons hanging above like silent witnesses. The human, her new husband, had taken a small guest chamber on the far end of the palace. He hadn't demanded anything, hadn't even looked proud of his new position. He had simply said, "Rest well, princess. Tomorrow we start again." She didn't know what to make of him. No human had ever spoken to her like that, not with arrogance, not with fear, but with quiet sincerity. It confused her. It irritated her. And in a way she didn't understand, it made her chest ache. In the cold night wind, Sereth whispered to herself, "A human cannot be kind. They only pretend." But deep down, a small, unwelcome voice whispered back, "What if this one is different?" As the stars shimmered above, the Princess of Velar closed her eyes, not knowing that her life and her heart were about to change forever. The first weeks of their marriage felt like walking through ice. The great palace of Velar, once filled with the hum of soldiers and servants, had grown quiet. Everyone watched the princess and her new human husband from afar, whispering behind closed doors, curious, suspicious, waiting for the peace between their worlds to fail. Princess Sereth kept her distance. She spoke to Captain Elias Ward only when she had no choice. When they shared a table, her words were short, her eyes colder than steel. Elias, however, never argued, never raised his voice. He simply listened, answered with calm words, and respected her silence. Every morning, Sereth trained alone in the courtyard. Her movements were sharp, elegant, deadly, a reminder that she had once led soldiers into war. Elias would watch from a distance, his hands behind his back, saying nothing. Sometimes he would bring her water when she finished. You do not have to wait, she told him one day, refusing the cup. I did not ask you to watch me. He smiled slightly. You didn't have to. I'm here because I want to understand the woman I married. His voice was steady but gentle. It made her hesitate for just a moment before she turned away. Understanding a Valari princess is not something a human can do, she said coldly. Maybe not, he replied softly, but I can try. That night, she couldn't sleep. His words kept echoing in her mind. She didn't understand him. Humans were supposed to be aggressive, impatient, proud, but Elias was none of that. He seemed to carry a strange stillness within him, a peace that made her restless. Days passed. Sarath noticed little things about him. He rose before sunrise and stood by the window, staring at the twin suns as they rose over the silver horizon. He would quietly greet every servant in their own language. He spent hours studying Valari customs, reading about their history, trying to understand their traditions. He never complained, even when treated like an outsider. One afternoon, while walking through the palace garden, Sarath stopped. She saw Elias sitting on a stone bench near the pond. His head was bent over something small, her old mechanical bird, a toy she had loved as a child but had long been broken. She frowned. Why are you touching that? He looked up, startled for a moment, then smiled. I found it in the old storeroom. I thought I might be able to fix it. You can't, she said flatly. It stopped working years ago. Elias turned the tiny metal bird in his hands. Machines can break, princess, but sometimes all they need is patience. Sarath folded her arms. Humans know nothing about patience. You rush into everything with fire and emotion. He chuckled softly. Maybe that's true. But sometimes fire is what melts the cold. She didn't reply. Her chest felt tight again and she didn't know why. Without another word, she turned and left, her steps quick. Behind her, she could hear the soft clicking of metal as he continued to work. That evening, when she returned to her chambers, she found something waiting on her table. The mechanical bird, fixed. Its wings fluttered weakly and it let out a soft metallic chirp. Her heart stopped for a second. She touched it carefully. It was warm from his hands. Elias had left a small note beside it, written in simple Valari script. It read, "Some things are worth fixing, even when they take time." For a long moment, she just stood there, staring at the little bird as it chirped softly in the candlelight. Then she whispered, "Why does he care?" The wind from the open balcony brushed her hair, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter from the lower halls, Elias talking kindly to the guards. That night, for the first time since her marriage, Princess Sarath didn't feel angry. She felt uncertain. And beneath that uncertainty, something small and fragile began to stir. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the first spark of warmth that dared to live inside the walls of her frozen heart. The days slowly turned into weeks, and life inside the palace began to shift, quietly, almost unseen. Princess Sarath still tried to keep her heart guarded, but something had started to change. She found herself noticing Elias Ward more often than she wanted to. The way he spoke, the way he moved, the way his eyes carried warmth instead of pride. He was different from every human she had imagined. He didn't boast about victories, didn't demand attention. When the Valari council members mocked him for being too emotional, he never defended himself with anger. He simply smiled and said, "Emotions are not weakness. They are the reason we fight to protect what we love." Sarath had never heard anyone speak like that. To her people, emotion was something to control, not to show. Yet here was a man who wore his heart openly, and still stood strong. It made her question things she had always believed. One morning she found him in the training yard. The sun glowed golden on his skin as he practiced with a sword, an old Valari weapon that was too heavy for most humans. His movements were slow, clumsy even, but there was determination in every strike. "You are holding it wrong," Sarath said, crossing her arms. Elias looked up, surprised but smiling. "Then show me the right way." She hesitated, then stepped closer. She guided his hands on the hilt, adjusting his stance. Her claws brushed against his fingers. For a second she felt the warmth of his skin and it startled her. She quickly pulled back. He didn't laugh or tease her. He only said, "Thank you." That simple word lingered with her for the rest of the day. Later, during a council meeting, a Valari elder insulted him openly. "Why should we trust a creature that bleeds so easily? Humans destroy everything they touch. The room filled with soft laughter from the nobles. Elias did not argue. He bowed slightly and replied, "Maybe we destroy, yes. But sometimes we destroy walls, so peace can grow." The hall went silent. His words were gentle, but they struck deeply. Sarath's eyes softened without her realizing. When another counselor began to sneer again, she suddenly stood up. "Enough!" Her voice echoed through the hall. "This man you mock fought to end a war that none of you could stop. He stood for peace when all others wanted blood. You will show him respect." The silence that followed was heavy. The nobles exchanged nervous glances. Elias looked up, his expression full of quiet gratitude. After the meeting, he approached her in the corridor. "You didn't have to defend me," he said softly. "I didn't do it for you," she replied, trying to hide her embarrassment. "I did it because they were wrong," he smiled. "Still, thank you." She turned away quickly, afraid he might see the faint blush that touched her silver skin. For the first time since their union, her heart felt unsteady, not from anger, but from something far gentler. That evening, as she walked past his study, she saw him sitting by the window, writing something in a small book. He didn't notice her. His face was peaceful, lit by the orange glow of the twin suns. She wanted to ask what he was writing, but she didn't. She simply stood there for a moment, watching the calm rise and fall of his breathing, and felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. When she finally returned to her room, she whispered to herself, "Humans are strange. They fight with kindness instead of claws." She looked at the small mechanical bird still sitting on her table, the one he had repaired. Its tiny wings fluttered in the soft light, and for the first time Sarath smiled just a little. She didn't know it yet, but the cracks had already begun to form in the armor she had built around her heart. Peace is a fragile thing. Even after months of calm, there were still whispers of rebellion in both worlds. Some humans hated the Valari, some Valari despised humans, and there were those who believed that the marriage between Princess Sarath and Captain Elias Ward was an insult to both races. The palace guards had increased their watch, but danger has a way of finding cracks. One quiet evening, as twin moons glowed above the crystal towers, Sarath was walking in the royal garden. The air smelled of night-blooming flowers, and the silver leaves rustled gently in the wind. Elias walked beside her, silent as always, his hand resting on the small communicator at his belt. They were just beginning to talk about the stars, something they often did now, when the peace shattered. A sharp sound echoed through the garden. Then came another. A flash of light. A blast. The ground shook. Guards shouted. Smoke filled the air. Sarath barely had time to react when a small explosive detonated near the marble steps. The shockwave threw her backward. Before she could rise, Elias was already moving, running straight toward her. "Get down," he shouted. He threw himself over her, wrapping his arms around her body. The second blast struck behind them, fire and metal flying through the air. Sarath felt his body tense, heard a short gasp, and then nothing but the roar of the explosion. When the smoke cleared, the world was still. The guards rushed in, weapons drawn. The assassins were already gone, vanished into the night. Sarath blinked, dazed, her ears ringing. And then she saw it. Elias lying on the ground beside her, his uniform torn and dark with blood. His back had taken the full force of the blast meant for her. Her breath caught in her throat. "No, no, no!" she cried, kneeling beside him. His face was pale, his eyes barely open. He smiled faintly, even in pain. "You're safe. That's what matters." "Don't you dare say that," she whispered, her hands shaking as she pressed against his wound. "You shouldn't have done this. You could have died." He gave a small, weak laugh. Would have been worth it. Tears filled her golden eyes, tears she hadn't shed since childhood. The great warrior princess of Velar, who once faced entire fleets without fear, now trembled beside one wounded human. The medics arrived and carried him away. Sarath followed closely, refusing to leave his side. The halls that had once felt cold and empty now felt suffocating. Every step echoed her guilt. When they reached the infirmary, the doctors worked in silence, trying to save him. Sarath stood behind the glass wall, her claws digging into her palms. Her mind kept repeating his words, "You're safe." That's what matters. She didn't understand. He had no reason to protect her like that. She had been cruel, distant, and unkind. Yet he had chosen her life over his own. Hours passed before the doctor came out. "He will live," the Valari physician said gently. "But he will need rest. He cannot move for some time." Sarath's knees nearly gave out from relief. She walked quietly into his room. The steady beep of the monitor was the only sound. He looked so different without his calm smile, so fragile, so human. She sat beside his bed, unable to look away. The strong captain who once stood like unshakable stone now lay broken, all because he refused to let her fall. When his eyes opened slightly, she whispered, "Why? Why would you risk your life for someone who never treated you kindly?" Elias's voice was faint but steady. "Because peace isn't built by pride. It's built by love even when it's not returned." Her heart broke at his words. She felt tears slide down her cheeks. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand in hers. "I don't understand humans," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You give everything, even when there's nothing to gain." He smiled weakly. "That's what makes us human." Sarath sat beside him all night, holding his hand as he slept. The moons faded and the suns began to rise, painting the room with golden light. And for the first time she prayed, not as a princess, not as a warrior, but as a woman terrified of losing the man who had shown her what kindness truly meant. Days passed in quiet worry. The palace that once echoed with footsteps now felt like a temple of silence. Every night, Princess Sarath sat by Elias Ward's bedside, refusing to leave. The soft hum of medical machines became the rhythm of her heart. He looked fragile now, bandaged, pale, breathing softly. The man who had once stood between her and fire now lay still like a wounded bird. Sometimes she spoke to him even though he couldn't answer. "You foolish human," she whispered one night. "Why would you do this for me? I was cruel to you. I pushed you away." But he never answered. Only the slow, steady sound of his heartbeat replied. Days turned into weeks and slowly his body began to heal. When his eyes finally opened again, Sarath was sitting there half asleep beside him. The moment she saw him awake, she gasped and quickly wiped her eyes. "You're alive," she whispered. Elias smiled faintly. "Did you doubt me?" She shook her head. "No, but I feared the stars would take you anyway." He looked around weakly. "You've been here all this time?" "Yes," she said quietly. "Where else would I go?" A small, grateful smile formed on his lips. "Then I guess I'm luckier than I thought." From that day onward, Sarath helped care for him herself. She brought him his meals, read reports aloud, and even learned how to change his bandages. The servants whispered in surprise. None had ever seen the proud princess so gentle. Sometimes, she would sit beside him and listen as he talked about Earth. He told her about rain, the way it fell softly, washing away dust and sorrow. He told her about oceans, endless and blue, where the wind carried the scent of salt. He told her about home. Sarath listened quietly, eyes shining with wonder. "It sounds peaceful," she said softly. "We do not have such things here. Our world is always bright, never soft," he smiled. "Then one day maybe I'll take you to see it. The sound of rain would suit you." She laughed for the first time in months, a soft, honest laugh that startled even her. "Perhaps. But first you must heal." As days went by, their bond deepened in ways neither could explain. There was no need for grand words, no need for promises. Just silence, smiles, and small acts of care that spoke louder than any vow. One evening, as he tried to sit up and failed, Sarath quickly helped him, holding his shoulders steady. "You humans are stubborn," she scolded gently. He looked up at her, his gaze calm and kind. "So are you." Their eyes met, and for a long moment neither looked away. It wasn't the cold stare of strangers anymore. It was something warmer, softer, something that reached beyond fear or duty. When night fell, Elias looked at her and said quietly, "You've changed." She tilted her head. "How?" "You smile now," he said simply. "When we first met, your eyes looked like frozen glass. But now, they look alive." His words touched something deep within her. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. "Maybe your foolish kindness melted something," she admitted. Elias chuckled weakly. "If that's true, then I'll consider my injury worth it." She frowned, but couldn't hide the small smile tugging at her lips. "You humans always find beauty in pain." "It's strange," he nodded. "Maybe that's how we survive." That night, when he finally fell asleep, Sarath stood by the window looking out at the stars. The world outside was quiet, but inside her heart, there was a storm she could no longer ignore. She realized she didn't just care for him because he saved her. She cared because he had shown her something her world had forgotten, the power of gentle strength. For the first time, the proud princess of Valar whispered words she never thought she'd say. "Rest well, Elias," she murmured softly. "You've already done enough. And yet I wish you'd never stop trying." The stars outside shimmered like distant tears, and in their light, Sarath finally understood that love did not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it came quietly, like a human's gentle heart beating beside your own. The suns rose golden over the Valari palace, casting warm light across the marble halls. Elias Ward had finally recovered enough to walk again, though his movements were still slow, his body still weak. Yet every morning he pushed himself to move farther, to regain strength not just for himself but for her. Princess Sarath often watched him from a distance. She pretended it was curiosity, but she knew it wasn't. Something in her heart had changed. The cold armor she once wore, the pride, the distance, the walls, had all begun to fall away, piece by piece. But peace is never easy. And their fragile happiness was about to be tested. Word came from both councils, Earth's leaders and Valar's high command. Tensions were rising again. Small border skirmishes had begun. The old anger between species was stirring. Both sides wanted strength, loyalty, and sacrifice, and now they wanted them. Sarath was ordered to return to Valar's army as a commander. Her people believed she would lead them again if war returned. Elias, too, received his orders, to return to the human fleet as an advisor and officer. The message was clear. Their marriage had served its purpose. The treaty was signed, the peace was made. Now both must return to their duties, to their own people. That night silence filled their shared chamber. The little mechanical bird Elias had repaired sat quietly between them on the table, its wings folded. "They're recalling you," Elias said softly. She nodded, staring at the floor. "And you to your fleet." "Seems they don't trust peace as much as we do," he said with a sad smile. Sarath's claws trembled slightly as she clenched her hands. "They never did. To them peace is a tool, not a dream." He stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "Then what do you want, Sarath? Do you want to go back to being the warrior princess who never smiled?" Her golden eyes lifted to meet his. "You speak as if it's a choice." "It is," he said simply. "You can obey your people or you can follow your heart." For a long moment neither spoke. The air between them felt heavy, filled with the weight of everything they couldn't say. Finally she whispered, "You don't understand. My people need me. I was born to serve them." He shook his head. "You were born to lead them, but leadership doesn't mean chains. You taught me that strength isn't about control. Now it's your turn to believe it." She looked away, pain flashing in her eyes. "And what about you? Will you disobey your own orders?" Elias smiled faintly. "If peace depends on us being apart, then maybe it was never real peace." Her heart ached at his words. She wanted to tell him to stop, to make it easier. But she couldn't, because deep down she didn't want to lose him. The next morning she stood in the garden, the same place where he once shielded her from the explosion. The same stones, the same flowers, but everything felt different now. Elias walked toward her slowly, dressed in his navy uniform. The wind carried the faint scent of metal and rain. "You're leaving," she said quietly. He nodded. "Unless you ask me to stay." Her chest tightened. For the first time she couldn't find the strength to speak. She looked at him, the man she once hated who had become the reason she now feared silence. Finally she whispered, "You shouldn't stay for me." He stepped closer, his eyes soft. "I don't stay for duty, Sarath. I stay for love." Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that, without titles, without fear, without walls. Just truth. Tears welled in her eyes as she finally admitted the words she had buried deep inside. "Then stay, and I'll stand with you no matter what comes." Elias reached out, brushing her tears away. "Then together," he said softly, "we'll prove that peace is possible." The twin suns rose higher, wrapping them both in warm light. For the first time, Sarath didn't feel like a princess or a soldier. She felt human, and in that feeling she found her answer, not to her people, not to the council, but to her heart. The great hall of the Valari High Council was silent, tense as a string pulled tight. Nobles and soldiers from both Valar and Earth had gathered, their eyes sharp and skeptical. They had come expecting obedience, discipline, and perhaps a show of strength. What they did not expect was Princess Sarath standing beside Captain Elias Ward, hand in hand, facing them together. Sarath's golden eyes scanned the room. She felt the weight of centuries of tradition, the judgments of thousands of eyes, but she stood tall. The armor of duty had fallen away. What remained was honesty, courage, and the quiet strength that only love could forge. She spoke first, her voice clear and unwavering. "I will no longer serve two worlds in conflict. I will serve one world we build together." Gasps echoed through the hall. Some Valari whispered in shock. Some humans exchanged uneasy glances. The council elders' faces were rigid, unreadable. Sarath ignored them. She looked at Elias, and his hand gave hers a reassuring squeeze. Elias stepped forward. "Peace is not born from fear or orders. It is born from trust, respect, and courage. And we have both," he said. His voice carried strength, calm, and warmth all at once. "We choose each other not as duty, not as convenience, but because it is the right path for all of us." Some muttered that they were naive. Others claimed madness. But many who watched quietly felt something stir inside them. Hope, long forgotten. Sarath inhaled deeply, letting the power of her words settle. "We will lead not as rulers demanding obedience, but as partners who respect life, human and Valari alike. If you cannot follow, you may step aside. But know this, we will not return to fear." The room remained tense. Yet slowly some of the soldiers lowered their weapons. Some nobles softened their expressions. Elias smiled faintly. "The galaxy has always underestimated the human heart," he said quietly. "And it has underestimated the heart of a Valari princess as well." For a moment, history itself seemed to pause. The words they had spoken were simple, yet more powerful than any treaty, more binding than any law. They were a declaration not just of love, but of change, of something greater than the fears that had divided their worlds for centuries. As the twin suns rose outside, golden light poured through the crystal walls, bathing Sarath and Elias in warmth. Their hands remained clasped, fingers entwined, a silent promise to each other and to the galaxy that they would face whatever came, together. Later, in the quiet of their chambers, Sarath finally allowed herself to breathe. She looked at Elias, and for the first time she did not see a human who was strange and unpredictable. She saw a man who had taught her the meaning of courage, kindness, and love. Elias, noticing her gaze, smiled softly. "You've changed," he said, almost teasing. "And you," she replied, "have taught me that even a warrior can be gentle." He chuckled, the sound low and warm, echoing in the small room. "Then we are even." She laughed lightly, the sound pure and unrestrained. "Even?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Even in every way that matters." Years passed, and their story became legend. Across Valar and Earth, songs were sung of the princess and the human who chose love over duty, compassion over fear. They built a world where differences were celebrated, not feared, where peace was not fragile but strong, because it was rooted in hearts, not laws. And when asked how it all began, Sarath would always smile, her golden eyes shining with quiet pride. "I dreaded him once," she would say, "but the human heart, it has a strength no empire can command." Elias would add with a grin, "And sometimes it can even teach a princess to be human." Together, they looked at the stars, the same stars that had witnessed war, fear, and division. And now, under their light, two hearts beat as one, beyond fear, beyond duty, beyond comprehension. The galaxy watched, amazed, and for the first time in centuries it believed in something simple, something true: love, courage, and the unbreakable strength of the human heart. The end.